How tennis handles doping is weirder than you might think.
Anti-doping rule violations.
Admitting she failed a drug test.
We're about doping to win.
On his positive doping test.
It's not so straightforward. Unlike other sports that have a league like the NFL or the NBA where these cases are handled by the league office, tennis has this complicated structure of tournaments, organizations, laws, and more that make handing down a suspension or a ban to a player that much more nuanced. So to make things easier to understand, let's break down exactly how doping cases work in tennis, the history behind how all of this started, whether players are actually doping and what they're saying about it, and we can begin to see whether or not these punishments being handed down to players are really fair. Okay, first let's go back to the 1980s when drug testing was conducted by the Men's Tennis Council. Now this drug testing really just focused on recreational drugs, so things like marijuana, cocaine, meth, etc. But then in 1990, when the ATP Tour was created, they took over responsibility for testing and punishing drug usage. Then the ATP Tour decided that they wanted to look into performance-enhancing drugs in addition to recreational drugs. So yeah, just imagine all the players that were doping before 1990, just because the testing wasn't there. So then 3 years later, the Women's Tennis Association, the Association of Tennis Professionals, and the International Tennis Federation decided to join together and take on this doping for good. The World Anti-Doping Agency also gets involved in this as well, but we'll look at them later. So during this time, you start to see people getting caught for some stuff. For example, legendary tennis player Andre Agassi tested positive for meth in 1997. He got a 3-month suspension. He basically said that there was a drink that was spiked that he drank, but then later in his 2009 book, he said he lied and that he was actually addicted to meth. Okay, so then in 2007, the ITF took over all the anti-doping stuff. So the ATP and the WTA just weren't involved anymore. And you'll start to see some more punishments coming down. Richard Gasquet got banned for 6 weeks for testing positive for cocaine, which he said he may have gotten after kissing someone in a Miami nightclub. Then after looking into it, an independent tribunal ruled that he didn't do so on purpose. And since it wasn't performance enhancing, he was let go. And we'll get into the independent tribunal part in a bit. Martina Hingis tested positive for benzoyl, also linked to cocaine usage. She got a 2-year suspension and a $120,000 fine. Oh yeah, Maria Sharapova tested positive for meldonium in 2016, which is used to treat heart diseases. She came out then saying that she's been using this for years, but in 2016, this drug was added to the banned substance list, and so yeah, she also got a 2-year ban for that. Marin Cilic tested positive for naketamide, which helps increase blood flow and oxygen intake. He claimed that they were in his glucose tablets. He got a 9-month suspension for that. And then we get to Simona Halep, whose doping case is arguably the most interesting. In October of 2022, Halep tested positive for roxadustat, a drug that's used to help produce more red blood cells. She was then provisionally suspended for that. But then in May of 2023, she was charged with a second doping offense by the International Tennis Integrity Agency for irregularities in her athlete biological passport. During this time, the ITIA, as Halep has claimed, was delaying the quick trial that they claimed they would give her.
And the hearing was postponed on 24th of March. The ITF requested that the hearing on 24th of March should be cancelled.
Then on September 12, 2023, the ITIA suspended Halep for 4 years. They released this whole document that I'll link below that you can check out. But basically it stated that Halep's doping was intentional. Now there will be more that will come from this case, and there's a whole lot more going on, but by now you've probably noticed that these are actually big time players getting suspended for these doping violations. Like, these are Grand Slam champions, some of the greatest tennis players that this planet has ever seen. Sure, I could find you some examples of top players in other sports doping as well, but as many that have gotten suspended as tennis? And when players do, are they getting a 2, 3, 4 year suspension? Especially on a first time offense? I mean, let's just look into it. Here are just a few examples. DeAndre Hopkins was suspended 6 games without pay for violating the NFL's PED policy. In 2022, baseball player Fernando Tatis Jr. of the San Diego Padres was suspended 80 games for testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs. I mean, I could go on. There's countless examples of this, of players in other leagues getting far less than a 2, 3, 4 year suspension for a first-time offense that tennis hands out. But this has to be only a handful of people, right? I mean, it's not like everyone in tennis is doping, right? According to a survey by ESPN in 2016 that asked 31 pro tennis players, 65% of them claim that tennis just doesn't drug test enough. And they say that they personally know a player that has used PEDs. Yet 71% of them also estimated that less than 10% of players have actually benefited from them, which is kind of conflicting. But the fact is that a lot of tennis players know someone that has doped, and the fact that they think that the testing just isn't up to par just shows how many players are probably using the many loopholes to get around testing. But at the same time, you have these situations like Maria Sharapova testing positive after a drug she's taken forever gets added to the banned list, and Richard Gasquet accidentally kissing someone and testing positive for cocaine. These situations are also extremely tricky because the player seemingly didn't do anything wrong. So let's take a look at how these cases are actually settled. Okay, so there are 3 organizations that we need to discuss first. That is the World Anti-Doping Agency, the International Tennis Integrity Agency, or ITIA, and the International Tennis Federation, or the ITF. These 3 together joined to form the Tennis Anti-Doping Program. So if you remember, the ITF was handed over responsibility for testing back in 2007. These are the people that are responsible for implementing the Tennis Anti-Doping Program. Recently, though, the ITIA, an independent body, took over responsibility of investigating and prosecuting all the breaches of the Tennis Anti-Doping Program. These are the people that Simona Halep has been talking about on all her social media posts. They do all the testing at the competitions, outside the competition testing, they process all the sanctions for the violations, and that entire process. Now, the World Anti-Doping Agency is this global organization that writes out the general anti-doping policies and rules. This is what many sports and leagues around the world use for their policies. So if a player tests positive for a substance that's on the World Anti-Doping Agency's list of banned substances, the ITIA then takes the results, notifies the player, carries out an investigation in a supposedly timely manner, and this includes a trial, which is what Simona Halep was asking for a long time. And if the violation is confirmed, then the ITIA imposes a sanction, which ranges from warnings to maximum 4-year bans for first-time offenses to career bans. Then, if the player chooses to, they can appeal any sanction that's imposed by the ITIA to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is this independent body that takes on cases for athletes that have been sanctioned in doping offenses, as well as other stuff. And this is where the final call on the Simona Halep's case will take place. Imagine a high-profile case going to the Supreme Court for sports. But what are players actually saying about it? I mean, we already saw that players think that the sport doesn't drug test enough. But after looking into it, it seems pretty clear that players just want more consistency. Not just in testing, but consistency in everything. Serena Williams has talked about how she was singled out for random drug testing. Roger Federer has also talked about in the past how when he's at his home in Dubai, he never gets tested. And then when he's at his home in Switzerland, he always gets tested. I mean, there's countless quotes of players talking about not knowing when they might get a test or how testing has affected their day-to-day life as a player. Now, with all this being said, I think we can all agree that cheaters should be punished for what they do. I think where a lot of us might differ is how that punishment should be investigated and what that should look like. I mean, take the NFL for example. They've been notoriously contradictory with their suspensions for players that have doped or players that are being investigated for assault or other horrible offenses like that. So yes, obviously no sports organization is going to be perfect, but it seems like with tennis, you got to be that much more correct about your decision. And giving a 2, 3, 4-year ban for a player when that same offense would warrant a much less ban in another sport, especially when sometimes these drug offenses are not so straightforward as, oh, this person was blatantly cheating. Well, that long of a ban has implications to so many things. So yes, players should be punished. And obviously I can't complain too much about harsh punishments, especially when someone is blatantly cheating. But when it's not so straightforward, it seems like the ITF and the World Anti-Doping Agency and all of these other convoluted partners have to get their process in order. And at bare minimum, make sure that they're looking at everything objectively, fairly, and not try to use a few athletes to send a message to a broader group, especially when that broader group might also be doping. Okay, if you like this video, there's a few ways that you can support. You can subscribe, follow, whatever, wherever you're watching this. I also write these deep dives and share interesting insights into the worlds of sports business and sports technology that goes out once a week. You can check it out. It'll be the first link in the description below. You can unsubscribe from it at any moment. There's no payment whatsoever. It's completely free. And if you don't want to do that, well, then I guess you can watch the video on the screen right now.